welcome to our tutorial on how to make a holly wreath or draw garland for home. My name is Jenny and I'm the community gardener here at Houghton Hall Park. So thank you very much first of all for purchasing a pack, and I'm really sorry that you can't be with us and do this as a classroom activity, but there we go, at least you're still getting an opportunity to make it. So in your pack you should all have an oasis ring. Very, very important that this is soaked very well to start with. You could either run it very slowly under a tap, or if you've got quite a large sink, fill your sink with not that much water, place it in it and let it just take up the water. It's going to take up about 1.5 to 2 pints of water, so it's going to feel fairly heavy. The important thing is to make sure that this gets watered throughout the festive season. So if it's very, very warm, which it could well be, perhaps once, twice a week for a little bit of water. Take it outside, pop a jug of water and just keep replenishing it. If you don't do that and the oasis gets too dry, what happens is that the foliage will start to take more and more of the moisture out, and then it gets to a point where it just won't absorb water again. So that's important to do that. So once you've got this to this stage, I actually like to take off all the sharp edges because it makes it an easier surface area to work with. So what you need to do with that is just to run a knife all around the edge. You don't need to take off too much. It literally is just to take off the sharp corners. And then you'll find that your foliage actually goes in a little bit nicer. So go all the way around. And then the same on the inside ring. Doesn't have to be a particularly sharp knife, you could just use a dinner knife. Right, so get rid of all your bits of oasis afterwards, so you've got a nice clean work area, and then you could just rub your hands all the way around the edge to smooth that off and give you a nice area, like so. Okay, you may need secateurs if you are cutting some of your own foliage from your garden, but you will have been provided with quite a lot of nice foliage, and most of this will be able to be cut with a nice pair of sharp scissors. So I've got some floristry scissors, but most good kitchen scissors will do for the foliage that you're getting. Take care when using them, obviously because they're sharp. Always a good idea at this stage to put in your tie, which you could use a ribbon, you could use string. There'll be something in your packs for doing this, and you literally are just taking it round and tying it so that it can hang up. I'm going to actually use string. If you wanted to try and tie this in with your own festive decorations, you might choose to buy a piece of ribbon from a garden centre, or you might have something at home. So literally just looping it round and securing it, because it's a lot easier to do at this stage than when you try to add it in when you've got all your decorations on. Just clear those away. Right, because I'm doing one demonstration, but you may have ordered different packs here, I'm going to actually show you how to secure a branch if you were putting it onto one of the owl designs. So some of these designs have got a twig going through the centre of them. Right, sorry about the background noise, we've got dogs and we've got children outside, but it's just the beauty of doing one of these videos. Right, so if you've got a design that has got a twig going through it and you've got an owl or a penguin in your pack that you want to sit on, this is also the point to take your twig and put it at whatever angle you want. That's absolutely personal to you. You might decide you don't want to go down that route, in which case don't put it on. And then you're either taking a piece of string, piece of ribbon and just securing it in a couple of places, and that's all you'll need to do because it's not actually holding any weight. So if that's what you wanted to do, that's the stage to do that. The other thing which we haven't included in these packs, but you might like to do, you get a lot of little battery pack operated lights, which people like to do. This is also a good idea to attach at this point your battery pack to the back of your wreath ring or on the inside edge, because you've got a nice clear area to do it. And again, you could do it with a little bit of sellotape, a little bit of electrical tape, some string, and then at the moment, for the time being, just tuck your lights out the way. It's just to secure your pack on. You'll find it a lot easier at the beginning to do this. Okay, so if we pan across here to all the different foliages, you may have some of these foliages. You can also add your own foliage from home. What you need to do if you're looking to do your own foliages, because you might have some nice eucalyptus in your garden, you might have some Eleagnis, you might have Euonymus, they all make for very, very nice, good mix of foliage within your design. So you will have conifer, you will have box, you will have holly, you will have ivy, and quite possibly have some rosemary. I like to use quite a basic foliage to start with on the base, so I try and do quite a conifer heavy foliage to start with, because then I want to add the more interesting foliages to the top. So we're going to start with the conifer. I'm going to take our scissors. Now, whatever size you take it out on the side is the size you're going to increase it to. So this is a 12-inch wreath. So if I come out 2 inches, I'm going to end up coming out 2 inches the other side. So it's going to make it a 16-inch ring to hang on your door. Bear this in mind when you're making it, because if you suddenly start bringing it out this far, you're going to end up doing it on the other side, and you might well want a very, very wild, huge wreath, but it's something to be considered. And you need to keep in mind that you want to keep your foliage the same length all the way around, unless you want a very wild design. No point starting at 2 inches and coming out 6 inches by the time it comes around to the middle again. So with your conifer, it's quite nice if you, on the outside edges, you end up with the nice tips. So I'm going to take about this much. Everything that gets inserted into the foliage needs to be stripped. It's going to move my rubbish bucket here. This is so that you don't end up with a really, really big indentation into the oasis, because if you do, it will start to crumble, because it can only take so many pushes of foliage in. You want to start by inserting the foliage quite low into the edge of the oasis. So you want to come down here and you're pushing it about 1.5 centimetres, if not 2 centimetres in. The further it is into the oasis, the longer it will last, because the wreath ring will start to dry out from the outside edge to the inside edge. So if you've only just pushed it in a little bit, that's where it's going to dry out the quickest. So I'm not discarding these are going to get used later. I'm now going to cut the nice tips for now. I'm also going to make sure that I start to slightly angle down the foliage. I don't want it to be flying and all poking up like that, because it won't look so nice when it's in the door. So you're going to go around the outside edge, not completely touching it, because if you do, you'll end up with a very, very heavy edge, and we want to put other foliages in between here. So at this point in time, we are just going to take this round like this. And you're going to go all the way around until you join back up into the middle. Then for the centre ring, if you were to do the same by coming out at the same height, you'll end up with not being able to see the centre hole, and that's important that you define this. So with my centres, I always go at a slight angle and almost spiral the foliage round, just so that I can emphasise the middle ring here. Let's get rid of some of that. So this is where you can use up some of those not so nice pieces, because you actually won't really see them. So we call the oasis ring and all of this the mechanics, and it's all of this that needs to be covered by the end. So I'm going to just put this to one side and get you on to the next stage. True Blue Peter stuff. Alright, so as you can see, this one has got a little bit of all the conifer around and in the centre, but you can quite clearly see a nice hole in there. So that is where we get to for now. Now, if I didn't put any conifer in the middle, it will look like it hasn't all joined up together. So this is the stage where I'm also going to start to put a little bit of the conifer in the top. Again, really important that you don't go too high. If I was to put in a piece like that, it will make the wreath so deep, and when you add your decorations in, you'll hardly be able to see them. So make sure that you go probably just a few centimetres up. By the time you add your ivy and your other foliages in, it will start to fill in and look a little bit deeper anyway than this. So at this stage, just going to put in a few pieces of the conifer, just so it links the edge and the middle. Going all around like that. And then this is when it gets a little bit more interesting because you'll start to add your other foliages. Now I provided a holly that isn't too prickly. You may find that if you're doing this from bits of your own garden that you actually want to include holly. I would therefore make sure that any prickly foliage like holly is added as your very, very last foliage, otherwise you end up with very scratched hands. You might even want to put some gloves on by the time you add that. Osmanthus, which is a very similar foliage, if you know if you're a keen gardener, when you put some of that in your garden, that actually works beautiful into holly wreaths as well. Okay, so I just put that piece in as well, and I should think that's probably enough conifer at this stage. Right, so that's where we are at the moment. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of this one. So we've got our conifer stage now. We're going to add in some more interesting foliages. So this is box, a lovely evergreen foliage. It's got a nice smell to it as well. If you wanted to, you could actually use some of the house leaf shine spray that you put on house plants if you wanted to give this a little bit more of a glossy green. So I'm doing exactly the same here, but I'm almost going in between the conifer that I laid before. Same sort of length. In places you might think actually I'd like it to be a little bit more wispy and wild, and you might want to just bring out some slightly longer pieces. This is also where ivy trails could go in. You could add some trails down there, but for the purpose of this wreath I am just literally going to use exactly the same length all the way down. Again, don't forget to keep stripping off the bottom of your foliage so you've got a nice clean entry. You're trying not to keep putting foliage in and out of the same hole, otherwise you will end up with a hole and it won't stay in. Having said that, you might get a placement that isn't quite right, but again, make sure you don't put it up too high. You're trying to slightly angle this outside level down. And you want to be looking to make as much use of the foliage on the stem, because even if it's too small to go on that side, you might find you actually add it onto your inside. So you want to be trying to make the best possible use of every stem of foliage, especially if you decide you want to perhaps buy some from a supermarket. You can get some beautiful bunches of Christmas foliage, and therefore if you're paying for it, you want to make sure you're utilising it economically. So exactly the same again. I'm going to start going round the top by putting a little bit of foliage in between all the conifer at about the same sort of height. I'll just hold that up so you can see where we're at with that. So it's starting to build up now. I'm going to just carry on going round with my foliage. The important thing throughout all of this is actually just to enjoy it, because nobody knows what your design is meant to look like. So whatever it comes, you'll be very proud of what you've made. Really joined up to that centre there, and then I'll just put a little bit on the inside ring again. The inside ring doesn't have to have too much on it, because by default the top foliage will actually overlap and cover that anyway. So I'm sort of going on both sides of that top ring, not necessarily always in the centre, sort of staggering at either side. So again, just going to pop a tiny little bit on the inside, and I shall hold it up again for you. We are at that stage. Okay, so that's foliage number 2. Then we can start putting another one in. I've actually got some unanimous here, which is lovely because it's variegated. It just brings it to life a little bit more with the white. And you might find you've got a nice little bit of holly in your garden that will do this. So you can see this is naturally quite bunchy. This is the same that's going to happen with the ivy as well. So when you put a piece of this in, you're going to get a very big piece of coverage in one go. Don't want to have this so dense that the wreath suddenly becomes all white. So you might want at this point to start staggering it a little bit more freely, so there are bigger gaps between what you're putting in. Put some at the side, some at the top. Vary your placement now, because you are trying to cover this oasis up to about 75% before we can add any decoration into it. Then that will give us, by the time you've added your decorations, that should only give you a few points that will need filling in afterwards. So taking that round. Probably about there with that one. So let's show you that. Okay, so there we go. So that's a little bit of the anonymous in there. And now I'm going to come to the lovely tree ivy. So this is quite old ivy, which is why it started to produce berries. I personally like the berries in it. I think they add a little bit of a festive feel. You can get some which are a little bit darker and blacker, which again add a nice feel. You might want to take any leaves off that have been eaten or a little bit tatty. Again, you could spray this with the leaf shine to give you a nice glossy finish. So if I was putting berries in, I would treat them exactly the same as the foliage, strip it off and put them in. And then the way you're using this is to use them in little chunks and hold them together and to start putting them around. If the ivy leaves are very big, you could even add a couple just individually and push them in like that, which will give you, because it's a different size, a different texture, cobweb on there, or part of the added natural interest. Okay, a little bit more of the berries in here. So with this one, I'm cutting it there. I'm going to cut the berries off, because if I put it in like that, that will be too high. So taking that off, bunching that up a little bit, and then pushing it into the oasis so that it creates a little rosette of greenery all of its own. Pushing this through. Few more of those leaves, we'll add a little bit more of the berry, and then we'll probably move on to another foliage. However, if you really like the foliage, there is nothing wrong with you adding much more of it and reducing something else. Whatever you do, do not try to use up every little bit of foliage that's in your pack. It is not an exact science. I've just tried to include a nice array in there for you. So yeah, that's probably a very good point, otherwise you'll end up with a wreath that's like a forest on your door. And put that last little berry in there and a couple of leaves, and we'll just hold that up again. So you can see it's starting to build up. So from the side, it's not too deep, but you've got a nice selection in there. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the rosemary, which has got a beautiful scent to it. So again, although it's a very, very long piece, you're only going to want to use the tips perhaps around the edge to soften, but these little pieces you could then use within the centre part of it. So I tend to use all the nicer pieces around the edge and then use those as little clusters. You might find you need secateurs for some of these bits. They are a little bit harder to cut than others. So I know that I'm going quite quick with this, but you will take your own time, go at your own speed and just enjoy it. If we were doing this in a commercial situation, I reckon we could probably make these in about 20 minutes all decorated. So there's a different speed going on. But for this, it's just a pure pleasure. So, a little bit more in there, but you can see we are gradually seeing less and less of the oasis now. Just hold that up again. Okay, so that's just a little bit of rosemary, another texture, which is really, really nice with it. So now I'm going to come to the holly, and that will be the last foliage I put into here before we start to add the decorations. So with the holly, again, you might want to take a stem like that, cut it in half, use half of that quite low into the oasis, and then push the other part in. A little bit more of that anonymous again. Never a bad idea to put it on the floor to look at it, because you'll be looking directly down on it and you can see if you think it needs a little bit more in any particular area. I'm just going to go back because I feel like I've got not enough of this in there all the way around. Okay, so that's where we are at this stage. Okay, so a nice selection going on. So at that point I'm going to stop and then we'll put some decorations in. So this is the fun part. This is when all the lovely bits that you want to put into it come together. Now you've all bought different types of displays, and what I'm going to do is try and give you a crash course in how to wire everything that you're perhaps putting into it. And again, you might want to add your own decorations. So if any of you have got music scrolls, you will find that you've got in your pack little sheets of music. We've just taken this out of one random book. They're not Christmas designs if you actually read, they're just varying ones. So roll them up, a little bit of sellotape just to hold it in place. Then you can take raffia, you could do a piece of actual ribbon if you prefer, you could do a nylon thread, you might prefer you don't want anything on it at all. That's all you're going to do just to finish it off and give it like a little finish there. And then you cut your ends off, and then you'll take a wire and you'll just sellotape that onto the back. And that's as simple as that, and that will give you 3 little music scrolls to put through. So that's one of the designs. With log bunches and cinnamon sticks, they are just little twigs that are just twisted nicely with wire, and then we finish them in varying forms. But obviously if you've got a very, very long one, you might want to put 2 together. You're taking your wire, you're putting it behind it, you're bending it up and around until it comes back on itself, and then you're twisting it together nice and tight. And you can either use your fingers, you could use a pair of pliers, and that's what you're going to do. And then again, you take your raffia or whatever decoration you want to do and just try to disguise that green wire a little bit and then tie in a bow. Okay, so that's what we do with something like that. On the logs, we've just touched them up with a little bit of paint on there just to give you a frosty finish. So if you were trying to use a decoration, perhaps like a cherub, something that's been bought from one of the shops, you would probably want to take, unless you're hanging it from the centre of your wreath, which you might do, you might prefer to actually have this sitting in the centre, in which case you'd want to perhaps leave that decoration on. For most of mine, I prefer to nestle them in amongst the foliage, so I'd cut all of those excess pieces off, and wherever the hanger was, you're just replacing it with the wire. So you're just going to put the wire through there and then twist it together. You might prefer to put something perhaps through this part of it, but just look at your decoration. It'll be an obvious place where you can do it, but then I would prefer to have something like that nestled in rather than hanging. So with pine cones, get some more wires. So pine cone wiring, you're looking at the bottom edge of your pine cone and you're trying to take your wire as low around the base as you can. And you're going to go all the way around until you join up to the wire and then just twist it around a couple of times. Okay, so that's a pine cone. Now this is me using up things like I do. This was an old, very, very old sort of fairy light, and I have just wrapped some wire around just to create like a crystal flower. But again, you'll see when I make this design, it just adds another little bit of interest. Something like the ice skates. I put the wire through here so they hang. You might want to vary your wire so that you end up on different heights. Again, it's very personal how you want to place things into your design. With orange slices, always a good idea not to go too far through the centre, otherwise you're going to have a big green wire on show. You can either put two together and then go quite close to the rind, a little way up, bend it back, and again just spin the wire around a couple of times, and then when you insert it you'll put this in so that the foliage will cover where you've put your wire through. And we've got lotus heads. Some love them, some hate them. They can be sprayed gold, silver, copper, white if you wanted to create another decoration, or you can obviously leave them natural. They've got quite a hard stalk on them. You can wrap your wire around, but I do find that tends to come off after a while. So I go deft, push through the soft part of it, and then spin it round, and then again you've got an angled design. If you're using whole oranges, they're quite seasonal in packs, you're going to push a wire through the centre of them. I sometimes use a skewer to push the hole through first because they can be a bit tough and you can bend your wire. So go through and then again just twist round so it doesn't slip. Okay, that's those. And then I've also got, this is just from an old Christmas garland. I've just cut some artificial pieces of fern from it, which I'm going to put through mine. But you'll start looking around your garden and you'll perhaps see things like seed heads, even clematis, the fluffy clematis heads look lovely. They're included in things like this. So I've got that, and then baubles, exactly the same, just pushing it through the little edge. Okay, so I'm going to put all this back away and then I shall show you how to start compiling a design. Okay, so we're back with this, starting to put the decorations in. Whether you put the bow in at this point is entirely up to you. I've gone for quite a sparkly one. You could put your bow in the top or the bottom, no right or wrong. That's just all personal opinion, and all of this is just a personal display. Sometimes people like to cluster the same items together. I'm going to go for a more random, evenly spaced design. So I'm going to start with my roses, and again you're trying to push things in so they look a little bit nestled in amongst the foliage and don't want to look like they're just sort of two placed. I'm just going to push those in a little bit. When I put a lot of my decorations in, rather than just putting it in as a straight wire, I do tend to bend them round. This just acts as a little bit more of an anchor into the design. And I'm going to try and push some of bits so that you get different angles. So they might be slightly pointing out. You can see already it's started to get a little bit going on in there. I bought, these are slightly different baubles. These are baubles on little stems, but the other ones you might need to add your own wires to. Depends what you get into your pack. You might end up with a combination of both depending on the colours that we were able to provide. So obviously we were doing classes, we hadn't really geared this up for selling as packs, so some things are slightly different in order to do that, because when people come to classes they will sometimes swap bits and pieces around, and we used to have it that you could choose your own ribbons. So that's where the baubles going in, so that's a little bit of sparkle there. I'm going to just start to add these. So I've got 5 of these, so the placement on these is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to just go in and out random places. So you can see perhaps with a little battery set of lights how the white would actually sparkle quite nicely. And I've got the little log twigs here, which I'm just going to again push in, nestle in. And then I'm going to start adding a little bit of the fern, just so it's got that frosted look to it. You could have done this perhaps with some of the little gold and silver foliage packs you can buy in the supermarket, just for a little sparkle. If you've got some spray paint, you could touch up some own bits and pieces. So there we go, started to add that in like that. Also quite nice is to add some more twigs. So these have just been painted with white emulsion, and just add a little bit of texture. You could do it with red twigs, you could do it with just natural hazel. You might prefer to have just a very, very standard design and you don't want anything like this going through. I personally like a little bit of a natural twig. These are different lengths. I think the more random the better on this. And I'm putting some on the top, some on the inside and some on the outside. Don't need to wire these, that's because they're strong enough to go in without a wire. The only reason you add a wire is because it wouldn't be able to sit in on its own. So if you've got something like the roses that came on their own wire, you'd be able to incorporate it. So if you're putting your bow in, you want to look at where your string is, and actually I'm going to just take that out to put the bow in, and then I might just move that twig. All the ribbon, unless it's raffia, has got a wire on it, so you'll be able to tease and pull this out so it sits, because it might have just got a little bit squashed in your bags. So just carefully play around with that until you're happy. So that would be the design like that. Now some people may have some sparkle garland or some of the classic beads. If you've got something like this, you want to weave it in and out until you're happy with how it looks, and then you're actually going to make some like little staples out of the wires to secure it in. So this is going to give it quite a decadent look. I'll hold it up in a second once we've fastened it. So that's gone all the way around to the top. I'm just going to get some wires. With your wires, I've probably cut those into about 3, so we've got some decent staples. And then all you're going to do is every now and again push it down into the oasis to pin it in place, so that when you hang it up, it doesn't start drooping off everywhere. You might have preferred to have just like a lovely big trail of it that hangs down the front of your door with some extra ribbon from your bow. Just hold it up and make sure you've not missed a placement. No, that seems quite secure. Right, so that is the finished design. I think you wanted to go really mad, you could perhaps add a white one as well, or you could have some trails coming down the bottom. So at this point, that is the design I've created today. All that I then do is just go look around in sort of any little gaps where I can still see the oasis. I'll just poke a little bit of foliage, but that really wouldn't take long to do at all. So I hope you have found this informative, helpful, useful. You can rewind and play this again and again. You'll also find in your packs there is a written version that's perhaps not quite as much detail, but it will give you the basic tips to do it. And of course, if you've got any questions, you've only got to email us at the park and we'll soon answer them for you. Okay, have a great time. Thank you very much.